Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire to streamline operations by converting a limited liability company, LLC, to a C corporation. The managing member has expressed a preference for the quickest and least expensive method, suggesting that simply amending the LLC's operating agreement to reflect corporate structure and filing a new business name with the state would suffice. As a paralegal tasked with assisting this conversion, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and professional responsibilities? Option A. Proceed with amending the operating agreement to reflect corporate structure and filing a new business name, as this is the most cost-effective and time-efficient method suggested by the managing member. Option B. Advise the managing member that a formal conversion is not necessary and that operating as a C corporation under the existing LLC structure is permissible with internal adjustments. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the relevant state statutory conversion provisions, identify all required filings and approvals, and draft the necessary documentation to effectuate a statutory conversion, ensuring all notice requirements to members are met. Option D. Focus on the operational benefits of the C corporation structure and prepare a memo outlining these advantages, deferring detailed legal compliance to a later stage once the operational transition is complete. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the relevant state statutory conversion provisions, identify all required filings and approvals, and draft the necessary documentation to effectuate a statutory conversion, ensuring all notice requirements to members are met. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to navigate the complex legal and ethical considerations surrounding the conversion of a business entity. The paralegal must not only understand the technical elements of conversion, but also the potential impact on stakeholders and the regulatory compliance required. Careful judgment is needed to ensure the chosen approach aligns with legal requirements and ethical duties. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the existing business structure, the proposed new structure, and the specific statutory requirements for conversion in the relevant jurisdiction. This includes identifying all necessary documentation, ensuring compliance with notice provisions for stakeholders, and verifying that the conversion process meets the substantive legal tests for the chosen entity type. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal accuracy, regulatory adherence, and the protection of stakeholder interests, which are fundamental duties for a paralegal. Specifically, under the relevant U.S. state corporate law frameworks, e.g., Delaware General Corporation Law, Model Business Corporation Act, a conversion requires strict adherence to statutory procedures, including filing specific certificates with the Secretary of State and ensuring the plan of conversion is properly adopted by the relevant governing bodies. Failure to meet these elements can render the conversion void or subject the entity to legal challenges. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the operational benefits of the new structure without verifying statutory compliance is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the paralegal's duty to ensure legal validity and can expose the business and its principles to significant legal and financial risks. It overlooks the critical requirement that a conversion is a legal process governed by specific statutes, not merely an operational decision. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed and cost efficiency over thorough legal review is also professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of legal integrity. This approach risks overlooking crucial legal requirements, potentially leading to a flawed conversion that could be challenged later, incurring far greater costs and liabilities. It demonstrates a disregard for the paralegal's duty of diligence and competence. A further incorrect approach that relies on informal agreements or assumptions about the conversion process, without consulting the governing statutes and case law, is equally unacceptable. Legal conversions are formal processes with defined legal steps. Relying on informal understandings is a direct violation of the paralegal's obligation to provide accurate legal support and can lead to significant legal errors. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the core legal issue, in this case, business entity conversion. 2. Researching the specific statutory framework governing the conversion in the applicable jurisdiction. 3. Identifying all stakeholders and their potential interests or rights affected by the conversion. 4. Developing a plan that addresses all legal and procedural requirements, including documentation, filings, and notice provisions. 5. consulting with the supervising attorney at each critical juncture to ensure accuracy and compliance. 6. Prioritizing legal validity and regulatory compliance above all other considerations. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates a need to understand the precise intent behind a recently enacted federal statute concerning environmental protection. The paralegal is tasked with researching its legislative history to advise a client on compliance obligations. Which research approach best fulfills this requirement, adhering strictly to U.S. federal regulatory frameworks and legal research best practices for paralegals? Option A. Reviewing the final text of the statute and then consulting scholarly articles and legal commentary that discuss its implications. Option B. Focusing on news articles and press releases issued by the environmental agency responsible for implementing the statute. Option C. Examining the enrolled bill, committee reports, floor debate transcripts, and any amendments proposed and debated during the legislative process. Option D. Analyzing judicial decisions from other common law countries that have similar environmental protection statutes. The correct answer is A. Reviewing the final text of the statute and then consulting scholarly articles and legal commentary that discuss its implications. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to navigate complex legislative history to accurately interpret a statute, which is crucial for providing sound legal advice and drafting accurate legal documents. The integrity of legal research directly impacts client outcomes and the administration of justice. The paralegal must demonstrate meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of the legislative process. The correct approach involves systematically tracing the development of the statute through its various stages, including committee reports, floor debates, and amendments, to understand the intent of the legislature. This method is grounded in the principle of statutory interpretation, that legislative intent is paramount. In the U.S. federal system, for example, the congressional record, committee reports, e.g., House reports, Senate reports, and enrolled bills are primary sources for understanding legislative history. Relying on these authoritative documents ensures that the interpretation is based on the most direct evidence of legislative intent, aligning with established legal research methodologies and ethical obligations to provide competent representation. An incorrect approach of relying solely on secondary sources like law review articles or treatises, while useful for initial understanding, fails to provide the definitive evidence of legislative intent. These sources are interpretive and may not accurately reflect the nuances or specific intent of the lawmakers. This can lead to misinterpretations and flawed legal arguments, violating the duty of competence. Another incorrect approach of focusing only on the final enacted text without examining its legislative journey overlooks the possibility that the final wording may not fully capture the original intent, or that subsequent amendments introduced significant changes. Statutes are often the product of compromise and negotiation, and their meaning can be clarified or altered by the legislative process itself. Ignoring this process risks misconstruing the statute's purpose and application. A further incorrect approach of prioritizing judicial interpretations of similar statutes from other jurisdictions is also problematic. While comparative law can be informative, the specific legislative history of the statute in question is the most direct and authoritative source for understanding its meaning within its originating jurisdiction. Relying on foreign interpretations can lead to anachronistic or irrelevant conclusions, failing to address the unique legislative context of the statute being researched. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific statute in question and its jurisdiction. 2. Determining the purpose of the research. Is it for statutory interpretation, identifying legislative intent, or understanding the evolution of a law? 3. Consulting authoritative primary sources of legislative history relevant to that jurisdiction, e.g., congressional record, committee reports, enrolled bills for U.S. federal law. 4. Cross-referencing information from multiple primary sources to ensure accuracy and completeness. 5. Supplementing with reputable secondary sources for context, but always deferring to primary legislative documents for definitive interpretation. 6. Documenting the research process meticulously, including all sources consulted and the findings derived from them. Question 3. The audit findings indicate that a paralegal, tasked with managing pre-litigation settlement negotiations for a complex commercial dispute, has been presented with an initial settlement offer from opposing counsel. The paralegal's primary objective is to optimize the process for achieving a favorable outcome for the client, while adhering to all professional and regulatory guidelines. Which of the following approaches best reflects a process optimization strategy in this context? Option A. Immediately counter the opposing counsel's offer with a significantly higher demand, without first conducting a detailed review of the client's updated financial position or consulting with the supervising attorney on strategic concessions. Option B. Advise the client to reject the offer outright and prepare for immediate litigation, without first exploring the potential for mutually agreeable terms or assessing the cost-benefit of further negotiation. Option C. Propose a settlement that closely mirrors the opposing counsel's initial offer, prioritizing speed of resolution over a thorough exploration of alternative terms or potential counteroffers that could benefit the client. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all case-related documentation and client objectives, then engage opposing counsel to explore the feasibility of their offer, identify areas for potential compromise, and collaboratively develop alternative settlement proposals that align with the client's best interests, all under the supervising attorney's guidance. The correct answer is A. Immediately counter the opposing counsel's offer with a significantly higher demand, without first conducting a detailed review of the client's updated financial position or consulting with the supervising attorney on strategic concessions. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to balance the client's immediate desire for a swift resolution with the long-term implications of a settlement agreement, all while adhering to strict ethical and regulatory obligations. The paralegal must act as a zealous advocate within the bounds of the law and professional conduct, ensuring that any proposed settlement is not only acceptable to the client, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. The pressure to achieve a quick settlement can sometimes lead to overlooking critical details or failing to adequately explore all avenues, which can have detrimental consequences for the client and expose the supervising attorney to professional liability. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all relevant documentation, a clear understanding of the client's objectives and risk tolerance, and proactive communication with the opposing counsel to explore settlement terms that are fair and reasonable. This includes identifying potential areas of compromise, proposing alternative solutions, and ensuring that any proposed settlement is fully vetted for legal sufficiency and client benefit. This approach aligns with the paralegal's duty of competence and diligence, as well as the ethical obligation to keep the client informed and to act in their best interest. It also respects the attorney's ultimate responsibility for the case strategy and settlement approval. An incorrect approach that involves immediately agreeing to the opposing counsel's initial offer without adequate investigation or client consultation is professionally unacceptable. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and competence, potentially leading to a settlement that is not in the client's best interest. It also bypasses the necessary client consent for settlement, violating ethical duties. Another incorrect approach, such as refusing to engage in any negotiation until all potential litigation avenues have been exhausted, can be detrimental to the client by unnecessarily increasing costs and delaying resolution, potentially breaching the duty of efficiency and cost-effectiveness. Furthermore, making unilateral concessions without client approval or attorney oversight constitutes a serious ethical breach, as it exceeds the paralegal's scope of authority and undermines the attorney-client relationship. Professionals should approach settlement negotiations by first understanding the client's goals and the strengths and weaknesses of the case. This involves a comprehensive factual and legal analysis. Next, they should develop a negotiation strategy in consultation with the supervising attorney, identifying acceptable settlement ranges and potential concessions. Throughout the negotiation process, maintaining open and honest communication with both the client and opposing counsel is paramount. The paralegal's role is to facilitate the negotiation process, gather information, draft proposals, and convey offers, always under the attorney's supervision and with the client's informed consent. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that a paralegal is preparing to conduct direct examination of a key witness in a civil litigation matter. The paralegal's objective is to elicit testimony confirming that the opposing party was speeding at the time of the accident. Which of the following approaches to questioning the witness is most consistent with the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines for conducting direct examination? Option A. Interject personal observations and interpretations of the witness's demeanor to imply the opposing party's speed, such as, "You seem to recall the car moving very fast, correct?" Option B. Ask the witness broad, narrative questions that allow for extensive, unguided recounting of the entire event, without specific prompts about speed. Option C. Ask the witness leading questions that directly suggest the speed, such as, "The opposing party's vehicle was traveling at a high rate of speed, wasn't it?" Option D. Ask the witness a series of open-ended questions designed to elicit their observations about the speed of the opposing party's vehicle, such as, "What did you observe about the speed of the vehicle?" Or, "Can you describe how the vehicle was moving?" The correct answer is D. Ask the witness a series of open-ended questions designed to elicit their observations about the speed of the opposing party's vehicle, such as, "What did you observe about the speed of the vehicle?" Or, "Can you describe how the vehicle was moving?" Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the paralegal must balance the need to elicit helpful testimony from a witness during direct examination with the strict ethical and procedural rules governing such examinations. The paralegal's role is to present the client's case effectively, but this must be done within the bounds of the law and professional conduct. The primary challenge lies in guiding the witness to provide relevant and admissible evidence without suggesting answers or improperly influencing their testimony, which could lead to objections and potentially harm the case. The correct approach involves carefully crafting open-ended questions that prompt the witness to recall and articulate facts in their own words. This method respects the witness's autonomy and ensures the testimony is presented as their own recollection, adhering to the principle that direct examination should elicit factual information, not coached responses. This aligns with the fundamental rules of evidence and professional conduct that prohibit leading questions on direct examination, as such questions can be seen as argumentative or an attempt to put words into the witness's mouth, thereby undermining the credibility and reliability of the testimony. The goal is to allow the witness to tell their story naturally, with the paralegal acting as a facilitator of factual recall. An incorrect approach that involves asking leading questions, such as, "You saw the defendant run the red light, didn't you?" is professionally unacceptable. This directly violates the rule against leading questions on direct examination. Leading questions suggest the desired answer and can be perceived as the examiner testifying rather than the witness. This failure constitutes a breach of procedural rules and can lead to the exclusion of the testimony or a mistrial, damaging the client's case and reflecting poorly on the paralegal's competence and ethical adherence. Another incorrect approach, asking overly broad or vague questions like, "Tell us everything you remember about that day," can also be problematic. While seemingly open-ended, such questions may elicit irrelevant or rambling testimony, making it difficult for the paralegal to control the flow of information and ensure all crucial points are covered. This can lead to inefficiency and may not effectively present the client's case. Ethically, while not as egregious as leading questions, it demonstrates a lack of strategic preparation and can be seen as failing to effectively represent the client's interest by not guiding the witness towards relevant facts in a structured manner. A third incorrect approach, interjecting personal opinions or interpretations during the examination, such as, "So, you were clearly upset by his actions, weren't you?" is also professionally unacceptable. This is a form of leading the witness and also injects the examiner's subjective viewpoint into the testimony, which is improper. The paralegal's role is to present facts, not to interpret them or express opinions. This violates the core principle of direct examination, which is to gather factual evidence from the witness, and can be seen as an attempt to manipulate the narrative rather than present objective truth. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the rules of evidence, particularly those pertaining to direct examination. Paralegals must prepare meticulously, anticipating the testimony needed and formulating clear, open-ended questions. They should practice active listening to guide the witness effectively and be prepared to rephrase questions if necessary. Crucially, they must constantly self-monitor their questioning to ensure they are not leading the witness, injecting personal bias, or eliciting irrelevant information, always prioritizing the ethical and procedural integrity of the examination. Question 5. Consider a scenario where a paralegal is explaining the discovery process in a civil litigation matter to a client who has limited legal knowledge and expresses anxiety about the volume of information involved. The paralegal needs to convey the purpose, typical stages, and potential client responsibilities during discovery. Which of the following approaches best fulfills the paralegal's duty to effectively communicate legal information to the client? Option A. Providing a detailed step-by-step explanation of each discovery tool, interrogatories, requests for production, depositions, using precise legal terminology, followed by a summary of the client's obligation to respond truthfully. Option B. Focusing primarily on the timeline for discovery and the potential costs associated with each stage, assuring the client that the legal team will manage all aspects to minimize their burden. Option C. Offering a high-level overview of discovery as a fact-finding phase, using analogies to explain the purpose, highlighting that the legal team will handle most of the work, and briefly mentioning the need for client cooperation when documents are requested. Option D. Explaining discovery as a mutual exchange of information to understand the case, using clear, everyday language to describe the main objectives and potential client involvement, and explicitly asking the client if they have any questions or concerns about the process. The correct answer is A. Providing a detailed step-by-step explanation of each discovery tool, interrogatories, requests for production, depositions, using precise legal terminology, followed by a summary of the client's obligation to respond truthfully. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the paralegal must balance the client's desire for a quick, simplified understanding with the ethical and regulatory obligation to provide accurate and complete legal information. Miscommunication can lead to client dissatisfaction, incorrect decisions, and potential malpractice claims. The paralegal's role is to bridge the gap between complex legal concepts and the client's comprehension, ensuring informed consent and effective representation. The correct approach involves tailoring the communication to the client's level of understanding, while ensuring all essential legal information is conveyed accurately and without misrepresentation. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of competence and diligence, requiring legal professionals to communicate effectively with clients. Specifically, under the relevant regulatory framework for paralegals, assuming a jurisdiction like the U.S., governed by state bar rules and professional conduct standards. This includes the duty to keep a client reasonably informed about the status of a matter and to explain matters to the extent reasonably necessary to permit the client to make informed decisions. This approach prioritizes clarity, accuracy, and client empowerment. An incorrect approach that oversimplifies legal advice to the point of omitting crucial details or nuances risks misleading the client. This failure to provide complete information violates the duty of competence and can lead to the client making decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate understanding, thereby undermining the principle of informed consent. Another incorrect approach that uses overly technical jargon without explanation, while technically accurate, fails the duty of effective communication. The client cannot make informed decisions if they do not understand the information provided. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in ensuring client comprehension. Finally, an approach that avoids discussing potential negative outcomes or complexities to maintain client morale, while perhaps well-intentioned, constitutes a failure to provide a full and candid assessment, which is essential for informed decision-making and can breach the duty of candor and honesty. Professionals should approach client communication by first assessing the client's existing knowledge and preferred communication style. They should then break down complex legal information into understandable terms, using analogies or examples where appropriate, without sacrificing accuracy. Crucially, they must confirm client understanding through open-ended questions and provide opportunities for the client to ask questions. This iterative process ensures that the client is not only informed, but also comprehends the implications of the legal information provided. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of paralegal work involves conducting factual investigations. In a complex civil litigation matter, a paralegal is tasked with gathering evidence and interviewing potential witnesses. The paralegal has identified several key individuals who may possess crucial information. The paralegal is also aware of publicly available online documents that appear relevant to the case. Considering the paramount importance of maintaining the integrity of the investigation and ensuring the admissibility of evidence, Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional standards and regulatory frameworks for paralegals in this jurisdiction? Option A. Immediately share preliminary findings and theories with key witnesses to gauge their reactions and potentially elicit corroborating statements. Option B. Conduct interviews by subtly guiding witnesses towards specific answers that support the client's anticipated narrative. Option C. Systematically collect all identified documents, meticulously document their source and chain of custody, and conduct interviews with witnesses in a neutral and open-ended manner, allowing them to provide their accounts freely without leading questions. Option D. Rely primarily on information found through online searches, assuming its accuracy and relevance without further verification or direct witness contact. The correct answer is C. Systematically collect all identified documents, meticulously document their source and chain of custody, and conduct interviews with witnesses in a neutral and open-ended manner, allowing them to provide their accounts freely without leading questions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the paralegal's duty to conduct a thorough factual investigation and the potential for inadvertently influencing or compromising evidence. The paralegal must navigate the delicate balance of gathering information without introducing bias or violating evidentiary rules. Careful judgment is required to ensure the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of any evidence obtained. The correct approach involves a systematic and objective process of evidence gathering and witness interviewing, adhering strictly to established protocols for chain of custody and documentation. This approach is right because it prioritizes the preservation of evidence integrity and upholds the paralegal's duty of diligence and accuracy. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of evidence law that require evidence to be authenticated and free from tampering. Furthermore, it reflects ethical obligations to conduct investigations competently and without misrepresentation. An incorrect approach that involves prematurely sharing preliminary findings with a key witness before the full scope of the investigation is complete is professionally unacceptable. This action risks influencing the witness's subsequent statements, potentially leading to unreliable testimony and compromising the investigation's objectivity. It violates the principle of independent fact-finding and could be construed as witness tampering or undue influence, depending on the jurisdiction's specific rules. Another incorrect approach, which is to rely solely on readily available online information without attempting to corroborate or verify its authenticity through primary sources or direct interviews, is also professionally flawed. This method fails to meet the standard of a thorough factual investigation. It neglects the paralegal's responsibility to gather admissible evidence and could lead to the introduction of inaccurate or misleading information into the case, undermining the client's position and potentially violating professional standards of care. A third incorrect approach, which is to conduct interviews in a manner that suggests desired outcomes or leads the witness to specific answers, is ethically and professionally unsound. This manipulative interviewing technique compromises the integrity of the witness's testimony, rendering it unreliable and potentially inadmissible. It violates the paralegal's duty to elicit truthful and unbiased information and can lead to accusations of professional misconduct. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the investigation's objectives, a thorough review of relevant legal and ethical guidelines, and a commitment to objective fact-finding. Paralegals should always prioritize the preservation of evidence integrity, conduct interviews impartially, and meticulously document all investigative steps. When in doubt about the proper procedure or ethical implications, consulting with the supervising attorney is paramount. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of minor grammatical inconsistencies and stylistic awkwardness within the draft legal brief submitted by the paralegal team. Which of the following approaches best addresses this issue to ensure adherence to professional legal writing standards and the integrity of the documents? Option A. Conduct a one-time workshop on basic grammar and punctuation for the paralegal team, assuming that general overview will resolve the identified patterns. Option B. Encourage paralegals to rely on automated grammar-checking software without manual oversight, trusting the software to identify and correct all stylistic and grammatical issues. Option C. Revise the internal style guide to include more complex legal terminology, believing that this will elevate the professional tone of the briefs. Option D. Implement a mandatory peer review process for all draft briefs, focusing on identifying and correcting errors in grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure to enhance clarity and conciseness, while strictly preserving the original legal intent. The correct answer is D. Implement a mandatory peer review process for all draft briefs, focusing on identifying and correcting errors in grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure to enhance clarity and conciseness, while strictly preserving the original legal intent. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to identify and correct grammatical and stylistic errors in a critical document without altering its substantive legal meaning or introducing new ambiguities. The pressure to maintain accuracy and clarity, while adhering to the specific stylistic conventions expected in legal practice, demands meticulous attention to detail. The paralegal must balance the need for conciseness and readability with the precision required by legal language. The correct approach involves systematically reviewing the document for errors in grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure, and then making precise corrections that enhance clarity and adherence to professional legal writing standards. This approach is justified by the fundamental ethical obligation of paralegals to provide competent representation and to ensure that all communications and documents are accurate and professional. Adherence to proper grammar and style is not merely aesthetic. It directly impacts the document's effectiveness, its potential for misinterpretation, and the overall credibility of the legal team. For instance, a misplaced comma or a poorly constructed sentence can alter the intended meaning of a clause, leading to potential legal disputes or misunderstandings. The Advanced Paralegal Certification, APC, implicitly requires a mastery of such foundational skills as they underpin the ability to effectively assist in legal matters. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on superficial changes without understanding the underlying grammatical rules would fail to address the root cause of the errors and might even introduce new problems. For example, merely rephrasing sentences without correcting the faulty parallelism or subject-verb agreement would leave the document structurally unsound. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy, making hasty edits without careful consideration, risks introducing new errors or misinterpreting the original intent, thereby compromising the document's integrity and the paralegal's professional duty. A third incorrect approach that involves making stylistic changes that alter the legal meaning or introduce jargon where plain language would suffice would be a significant ethical failure, as it deviates from the principle of clear and accurate legal communication. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a methodical process. First, thoroughly understand the purpose and context of the document. Second, identify specific errors based on established grammatical and stylistic rules. Third, implement corrections that are precise, clear, and do not alter the substantive legal content. And finally, review the revised document to ensure all errors have been rectified and no new issues have been introduced. This systematic approach ensures that the paralegal fulfills their duty of competence and upholds the standards of the legal profession. Question 8. System analysis indicates that a paralegal is tasked with researching the current precedential status of a key case for an upcoming litigation strategy meeting. The paralegal utilizes a legal research platform and reviews the Shepard's or key site report for the primary case. Which of the following analytical approaches best fulfills the paralegal's professional obligations for this task? Option A. Focusing only on cases that directly cite the primary case and disregarding any cases that might be indirectly related through a chain of citations. Option B. Reviewing the Shepard's or key site report to identify all subsequent cases that have cited the primary case and then analyzing the nature of each citation. E.g., affirmed, distinguished, overruled. Criticized to understand how the primary case's authority has been treated and its current validity. Option C. Assuming that any case listed as cited in the Shepard's or key site report is directly relevant and significant to the current legal issue without further analysis of the citation's context. Option D. Relying solely on the good law indicator provided by the research platform to confirm the primary case is still considered valid without examining the specific citing cases. The correct answer is B. Reviewing the Shepard's or key site report to identify all subsequent cases that have cited the primary case, and then analyzing the nature of each citation. E.g., affirmed, distinguished, overruled, criticized, to understand how the primary case's authority has been treated and its current validity. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the paralegal must accurately assess the precedential value and current validity of a case, which directly impacts the legal advice and strategy provided to the supervising attorney. Misinterpreting Shepard's or key site reports can lead to flawed legal arguments, missed critical updates, and potentially malpractice. The paralegal's duty of competence and diligence, as outlined by professional conduct rules applicable to paralegals, assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for this APC exam context, as no other is specified, mandates thorough and accurate legal research. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the Shepard's or key site report, focusing on the treatment of the primary case by subsequent decisions. This includes identifying citing cases that affirm, distinguish, criticize, overrule, or otherwise impact the original ruling. The paralegal must then analyze the substance of these citing cases to understand the nature of the treatment and its relevance to the current legal issue. This meticulous process ensures that the supervising attorney is fully apprised of the case's current standing and any limitations or strengths it possesses, fulfilling the duty of diligence and competence. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the good law indicator without examining the specific nature of subsequent treatments. This superficial review fails to uncover nuances such as a case being distinguished on its facts or criticized on its reasoning, which can significantly alter its precedential weight. This oversight violates the duty of competence by not conducting research with the requisite skill and thoroughness. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on cases that directly cite the primary case, ignoring those that might have indirectly influenced or been influenced by it through a chain of citations. Legal research requires understanding the broader legal landscape, and a narrow focus can miss critical developments or connections. This failure to conduct comprehensive research breaches the duty of diligence. Finally, an incorrect approach is to assume that a case listed as cited in a Shepard's or key site report automatically carries significant weight or relevance. The paralegal must analyze the context and substance of the citation to determine its actual impact. Failing to do so can lead to the inclusion of irrelevant or misleading authorities, undermining the quality of legal research and the attorney's ability to provide sound advice, thereby violating the duty of competence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a systematic approach to legal research. First, clearly define the research objective. Second, utilize the appropriate research tools, Shepard/key site, and understand their functionalities. Third, meticulously review the results, paying close attention to the nature of citations and their impact on the primary case. Fourth, analyze the substance of citing cases to determine their relevance and precedential value. Finally, synthesize the findings into a clear and concise report for the supervising attorney, highlighting any critical updates or limitations of the researched case law. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that new evidence has emerged that significantly alters the legal theories supporting our client's claims in an ongoing civil litigation matter. The deadline for amending pleadings as a matter of course has passed. What is the most appropriate procedural step to formally incorporate these new legal theories and supporting facts into the case? Option A. Inform opposing counsel of the new evidence and theories via email, stating they will be addressed at trial. Option B. Submit the new information directly to the court clerk for inclusion in the case file. Option C. File a motion for leave to amend the complaint with the court, attaching the proposed amended complaint. Option D. Draft a trial brief that includes the new legal theories and supporting facts without formally amending the pleadings. The correct answer is C. File a motion for leave to amend the complaint with the court, attaching the proposed amended complaint. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to navigate the procedural complexities of amending a pleading while adhering strictly to the governing rules of civil procedure and ethical obligations. The paralegal must balance the client's desire to incorporate new information with the court's need for orderly proceedings and fairness to the opposing party. Failure to properly amend can lead to the exclusion of evidence, dismissal of claims, or sanctions, all of which negatively impact the client's case and the paralegal's professional standing. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate timing, method, and scope of the amendment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves filing a motion for leave to amend the complaint with the court, accompanied by a proposed amended complaint. This is the procedurally sound method for modifying pleadings after the initial filing period has passed, as dictated by rules such as Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 15a in the U.S. This approach ensures that the court is aware of the proposed changes, can assess their timeliness and relevance, and can provide the opposing party an opportunity to respond. This upholds the principles of due process and judicial efficiency by maintaining a structured and transparent litigation process. It also demonstrates the paralegal's commitment to following established legal procedures, a core ethical responsibility. Incorrect approaches analysis. Filing an amended complaint directly with the court without seeking leave to amend is procedurally improper if the time for automatic amendment has passed. This bypasses the court's oversight and the opposing party's right to object, potentially leading to the amended complaint being disregarded or rejected. It violates the principle of orderly procedure and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent established rules. Communicating the new information directly to opposing counsel without filing a formal motion or amended pleading is insufficient to modify the official court record. While such communication might be part of a broader strategy, it does not constitute a legal amendment. This approach fails to formally update the pleadings, leaving the original claims and defenses as the operative ones before the court. Simply incorporating the new information into a trial brief or other subsequent filing without amending the complaint is also incorrect. Pleadings define the scope of the litigation. New claims or defenses must be formally introduced through amended pleadings to be considered by the court. Relying on later filings to introduce new theories prejudices the opposing party, who has based their defense on the existing pleadings. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach situations involving amending pleadings by first identifying the governing rules of civil procedure. This involves determining whether the amendment can be made as a matter of course, or if leave of court is required. If leave is required, the next step is to prepare a motion for leave to amend, clearly articulating the reasons for the amendment and attaching the proposed amended pleading. This motion should be filed promptly to avoid arguments of undue delay or prejudice to the opposing party. Throughout this process, maintaining clear and ethical communication with the client and opposing counsel is paramount, while always prioritizing adherence to court rules and procedures. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that paralegal is tasked with researching the specific anti-money laundering obligations for investment firms under the UK regulatory framework and CISI guidelines. To efficiently locate relevant documents, which of the following Boolean search techniques would best demonstrate mastery of connectors, operators, and wildcards for effective searching within this defined jurisdiction? Option A. Using a broad search term like financial crime and UK to capture all related documents. Option B. Utilizing a simple keyword search for AML compliance without employing any Boolean operators or wildcards. Option C. Constructing a query such as anti-money laundering or AML, an investment firm, and obligations or requirements, and FCA or PRA, to precisely target relevant UK regulations and guidance. Option D. Employing a search string like money laundering and Europe and investment to cast a wide net across multiple jurisdictions. Correct answer is A. Using a broad search term like financial crime and UK to capture all related documents. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to balance the need for comprehensive information retrieval with the strict adherence to the Advanced Paralegal Certification (APC) examination-specific regulatory framework, which in this case is assumed to be the UK regulatory framework and CISI guidelines. The paralegal must demonstrate mastery of Boolean search techniques without deviating from the prescribed jurisdictional scope, ensuring that all references and applications of search logic are consistent with UK law and CISI principles. The correct approach involves constructing a Boolean search query that effectively utilizes connectors, operators, and wildcards to retrieve relevant documents pertaining to financial services regulation within the UK, specifically focusing on anti-money laundering, AML, obligations for investment firms. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core competency being tested, the practical application of advanced search techniques within a defined regulatory context. By employing terms like and, or, not, and wildcards such as asterisks, or question marks, the paralegal can refine searches to include synonyms, variations in spelling, and related concepts while excluding irrelevant information. For instance, searching for anti-money laundering or AML and investment firm and obligations or requirements would be a robust strategy. This aligns with best practices for legal research, emphasizing precision and efficiency, which are critical for paralegal work under UK regulations and CISI guidelines that mandate thorough due diligence and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to construct a search query that includes terms or concepts outside the UK regulatory framework or CISI guidelines, such as referencing US-specific legislation like the Bank Secrecy Act or European Union directives that are no longer directly applicable post-Brexit without specific UK adoption. This fails to demonstrate an understanding of the exam's jurisdictional constraints and could lead to the retrieval of irrelevant or misleading information, violating the principle of accurate and relevant research mandated by professional standards. Another incorrect approach would be to use overly broad or simplistic search terms that fail to leverage the power of Boolean operators, resulting in an unmanageable volume of irrelevant results. This demonstrates a lack of mastery in applying advanced search techniques and would be inefficient, contrary to the expectations of an advanced paralegal. A third incorrect approach would be to neglect the use of wildcards or proximity operators when dealing with variations in terminology or phrases, leading to missed relevant documents. For example, failing to use regulat asterisk to capture regulation, regulatory, and regulates would be a significant oversight. Professional decision-making in similar situations requires a systematic process. First, thoroughly understanding the scope and jurisdiction of the research task. Second, identifying the key concepts and keywords related to the subject matter. Third, strategically selecting appropriate Boolean operators and or not and wildcards asterisk to build a precise and comprehensive search query. Fourth, testing and refining the query based on initial results, ensuring it remains within the defined jurisdictional boundaries and effectively filters out irrelevant information. This iterative process ensures that the paralegal delivers accurate, relevant, and compliant research outcomes. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that paralegals are spending significant time attempting to assess the legal viability of new client inquiries during initial interviews. A paralegal is meeting with a potential client who believes they have been wrongfully terminated. The paralegal's goal is to gather sufficient information to determine if the case warrants further review by an attorney. Which of the following approaches best balances efficient information gathering with ethical and regulatory compliance? Option A. Conduct a detailed interview focusing on the factual timeline of employment, the reasons provided for termination, and any documentation the client has regarding their employment and dismissal. Summarize these facts for the supervising attorney to provide legal analysis. Option B. Advise the client on the likelihood of winning a wrongful termination lawsuit based on the initial details provided, explaining relevant employment laws and potential damages. Option C. Immediately inform the client that their situation does not appear to meet the threshold for a wrongful termination claim and end the interview to save time. Option D. Ask the client to provide all employment records and correspondence, then independently research relevant case law to determine the strength of their claim before presenting findings to the attorney. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed interview focusing on the factual timeline of employment, the reasons provided for termination, and any documentation the client has regarding their employment and dismissal. Summarize these facts for the supervising attorney to provide legal analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in paralegal practice, balancing the need for comprehensive client information with the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and avoid the unauthorized practice of law. The paralegal must gather sufficient details to assess the viability of a potential claim and advise the client on the next steps, all while operating within the defined scope of their authority and adhering to professional conduct rules. The challenge lies in discerning what information is necessary for case assessment versus what constitutes legal advice or requires direct attorney involvement. The correct approach involves a structured interview process that focuses on eliciting factual information relevant to the client's stated problem. This includes understanding the timeline of events, identifying key individuals and entities involved, and gathering any supporting documentation the client may possess. The paralegal should then present these facts to the supervising attorney for legal analysis and advice. This method aligns with ethical guidelines that permit paralegals to gather information and prepare case summaries for attorney review, thereby avoiding the unauthorized practice of law and ensuring the client receives competent legal counsel. An incorrect approach would be to offer a preliminary legal opinion on the merits of the case based on the gathered information. This constitutes the unauthorized practice of law, as only a licensed attorney can provide legal advice. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns outright without sufficient information gathering, which could lead to a missed opportunity for the client and potentially violate professional duties of diligence and competence. Finally, failing to document the interview thoroughly and accurately could compromise the integrity of the case file and hinder the attorney's ability to effectively represent the client. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes information gathering within defined ethical boundaries. This involves 1. Understanding the scope of paralegal duties as defined by the supervising attorney and relevant bar rules. 2. Developing a systematic approach to client interviews that elicits factual information. 3. Recognizing the distinction between factual gathering and legal advice. And 4. Promptly escalating complex legal questions or the need for legal advice to the supervising attorney. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a paralegal to assess the most effective method for responding to a court-ordered discovery request that the client believes is overly burdensome and unlikely to yield relevant information, while also being mindful of strict discovery deadlines. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the paralegal's ethical and procedural obligations in this scenario? Option A. Research the relevant rules of civil procedure regarding discovery objections and the consequences of noncompliance. Then present a detailed analysis of potential responses and their implications to the supervising attorney for their decision. Option B. Advise the client to refuse to provide any information, citing the perceived burden and irrelevance, and inform the supervising attorney of this decision. Option C. Instruct the client to provide only the information they deem minimally relevant, bypassing the supervising attorney's review to meet the deadline. Option D. Immediately begin preparing a motion to quash the discovery request, without first consulting the supervising attorney or thoroughly reviewing the scope of the request. Correct answer is B. Advise the client to refuse to provide any information, citing the perceived burden and irrelevance, and inform the supervising attorney of this decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the paralegal must navigate the complex interplay between client instructions, the duty of zealous representation, and the overarching ethical and procedural rules governing civil litigation in the specified jurisdiction. The paralegal's role is to support the attorney, but they must also exercise independent judgment within their delegated authority and ethical boundaries. The challenge lies in identifying the most effective and ethically sound strategy for advancing the client's case, while adhering strictly to the court's procedural orders and the governing rules of professional conduct. The correct approach involves meticulously analyzing the court's order regarding discovery deadlines and the specific nature of the information sought. This requires understanding the rules of civil procedure concerning discovery, including the scope of permissible discovery, the grounds for objections, and the consequences of noncompliance. The paralegal must then communicate these findings and potential strategies to the supervising attorney, recommending a course of action that prioritizes compliance with the court's order while still seeking to obtain necessary evidence. This approach is correct because it upholds the paralegal's duty to assist the attorney in managing the case efficiently and ethically, ensuring that all actions taken are in accordance with the court's directives and the rules of procedure, thereby protecting the client's interests and avoiding sanctions. An incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide to ignore or delay compliance with the court's discovery order based on the client's perceived lack of cooperation or the perceived unlikelihood of obtaining the requested information. This failure to prioritize a direct court order constitutes a serious ethical and procedural violation. It undermines the authority of the court and exposes the client and the firm to potential sanctions, including dismissal of the case or adverse inferences. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the client to stonewall the discovery process without proper legal justification or consultation with the attorney. This not only violates the duty of candor to the tribunal, but also breaches the attorney-client privilege if not handled with extreme care and legal guidance. Furthermore, attempting to circumvent the discovery process through informal or improper channels would be ethically unsound and procedurally impermissible. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, thoroughly understanding the governing rules and court orders. Second, assessing the client's objectives and constraints. Third, identifying potential legal and ethical implications of various actions. And fourth, consulting with the supervising attorney to develop and execute a strategy that balances these competing considerations, always prioritizing adherence to legal and ethical mandates. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a paralegal is tasked with responding to a set of interrogatories and a request for production of documents in a state civil litigation matter. The state rules of civil procedure clearly outline a 30-day period for responding to interrogatories and a 30-day period for responding to requests for production, with specific provisions for filing objections within that timeframe. The paralegal has identified several interrogatories that may seek privileged information and some document requests that appear overly broad. What is the most procedurally sound and ethically responsible approach for the paralegal to take? Option A. Inform the supervising attorney that the requests are problematic and await further instructions without taking any immediate action on the discovery, as the deadline is still several weeks away. Option B. Prepare and serve a response that includes specific objections to the problematic interrogatories and document requests, citing the relevant state rules of civil procedure, and providing a factual basis for each objection, while also responding to the unobjectionable requests within the 30-day deadline. Option C. File a motion for an extension of time to respond to all discovery requests, citing the complexity of the requests, without first attempting to identify specific grounds for objection or response. Option D. Immediately begin gathering and producing all requested documents and answering all interrogatories to ensure timely compliance and address any potential issues later. The correct answer is D. Immediately begin gathering and producing all requested documents and answering all interrogatories to ensure timely compliance and address any potential issues later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of adhering to specific state rules of civil procedure when responding to discovery requests. The paralegal must navigate the precise timing and content requirements to avoid prejudicing the client's case. Careful judgment is required to ensure all obligations are met accurately and within the stipulated deadlines, as failure to do so can have significant legal consequences. The correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the state rules of civil procedure governing discovery responses, specifically focusing on the time limits for filing objections and the permissible grounds for such objections. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the procedural mandates designed to ensure fairness and efficiency in litigation. Adhering to these rules prevents waiver of objections and avoids potential sanctions for noncompliance, thereby protecting the client's interests and upholding professional responsibility. An incorrect approach of simply providing the requested documents without reviewing for objections fails to acknowledge the procedural rights available to the client. This oversight can lead to the waiver of potentially valid objections, such as privilege or overbreadth, which are crucial for protecting sensitive information and narrowing the scope of discovery. This failure constitutes a breach of the duty of diligence and competence owed to the client. Another incorrect approach of delaying the response beyond the statutory deadline, even with the intention of preparing a thorough response, is also professionally unacceptable. State rules of civil procedure strictly govern response times. Exceeding these deadlines can result in the automatic waiver of all objections and may subject the client to sanctions, including monetary penalties or even default judgment. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the critical importance of procedural timelines. Finally, an incorrect approach of filing generic objections without specific factual or legal basis is also problematic. While objections are permissible, they must be grounded in the rules and the facts of the case. Vague or boilerplate objections are often deemed insufficient by courts and can be overruled, negating their intended protective effect. This approach lacks the specificity required for effective advocacy and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent the discovery process rather than engage with it appropriately. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the relevant state rules of civil procedure at the outset of any discovery task. This includes identifying deadlines, understanding the scope of permissible discovery, and recognizing the grounds for objection. The paralegal should then analyze the specific discovery requests in light of these rules and the client's circumstances, consulting with the supervising attorney to determine the most appropriate strategy, including the formulation of specific and well-supported objections where warranted. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a particular clause in a commercial lease agreement, stating the tenant shall be responsible for all ordinary wear and tear to the premises, could be interpreted in multiple ways, potentially impacting the tenant's financial obligations significantly. The client, the tenant, argues that ordinary wear and tear should encompass minor cosmetic issues that arise naturally from regular use, such as slight scuff marks on walls or minor fading of carpets. However, the landlord's representative has suggested a broader interpretation, including more substantial repairs. As a paralegal tasked with advising the client on their obligations, which approach to interpreting this clause is most consistent with the plain meaning rule? Option A. Interpret ordinary wear and tear, based on the most common understanding of these words in everyday language, focusing on damage that occurs naturally and unavoidably from normal use and occupancy, excluding damage caused by negligence or misuse. Option B. Interpret ordinary wear and tear, by prioritizing the interpretation that minimizes the tenant's immediate repair costs, as this aligns with the client's commercial objective of reducing expenses. Option C. Interpret ordinary wear and tear, by researching prevailing industry standards for commercial leases in the specific geographic region to determine what is typically considered acceptable deterioration. Option D. Interpret ordinary wear and tear, by considering the landlord's stated interpretation, as they are the party with the ultimate authority over the property and its condition. The correct answer is A. Interpret ordinary wear and tear based on the most common understanding of these words in everyday language, focusing on damage that occurs naturally and unavoidably from normal use and occupancy, excluding damage caused by negligence or misuse. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to navigate the potential for ambiguity in contractual language, even when a seemingly straightforward term is presented. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the client's immediate desire for a favorable interpretation with the paralegal's duty to uphold legal principles and provide accurate advice. Over-reliance on a subjective interpretation or external market norms, without grounding in the contract's explicit wording, risks misrepresenting the legal position and potentially leading to costly disputes or failed objectives for the client. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any interpretation is firmly rooted in the established rules of contract construction. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to the plain meaning rule. This rule dictates that contractual terms should be interpreted according to their ordinary and commonly understood meanings, as they appear within the four corners of the document. This approach is correct because it aligns with fundamental principles of contract law, which prioritize the express intentions of the parties as evidenced by the written agreement. Regulatory frameworks and case law consistently emphasize that courts will first look to the plain language of a contract to ascertain the parties' intent. Deviating from this rule without clear justification, such as a term being technical or having a specific industry meaning that is itself clearly defined within the contract, is a failure to apply established legal standards. An incorrect approach would be to interpret the term based on the client's subjective understanding or what they wish the term meant. This fails because the plain meaning rule prioritizes objective interpretation based on the language used, not the subjective desires of one party. The law does not typically allow parties to unilaterally redefine the plain meaning of agreed-upon terms after the fact. Another incorrect approach would be to consult external market practices or industry standards to define the term, without first exhausting the plain meaning within the contract itself. While such external factors can sometimes inform interpretation if a term is genuinely ambiguous or technical, they should not override the clear and ordinary meaning of the words as written. This approach fails because it introduces external influences that may not reflect the specific agreement between the parties, and can lead to an interpretation that was not intended or agreed upon. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize the perceived commercial benefit of a particular interpretation over the literal meaning of the words. This fails because legal interpretation is governed by established rules of construction, not by a calculation of potential commercial advantage. While a paralegal should be aware of the client's commercial objectives, their advice must be grounded in legal accuracy and adherence to the plain meaning rule. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific contractual term in question. 2. Ascertaining the ordinary and plain meaning of that term as it would be understood by a reasonable person. 3. Examining the term within the context of the entire contract to ensure consistency. 4. If the plain meaning is clear and unambiguous, applying that meaning. 5. Only if the term remains genuinely ambiguous after applying the plain meaning rule should consideration be given to other interpretive aids, such as industry definitions or extrinsic evidence, and only then with caution and full disclosure to the client about the potential risks. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that a new fintech platform offers a novel investment product that is not explicitly defined within existing financial services regulations. A paralegal is tasked with advising on compliance. They discover a precedent case involving a similar, though not identical, investment product that was deemed to fall under specific consumer protection disclosure requirements. The paralegal must determine how to analogize this precedent to the new platform. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required regulatory compliance and analogical reasoning process? Option A. The paralegal should disregard the precedent case because the new product is fundamentally different in its technological underpinnings and market appeal, making any comparison irrelevant. Option B. The paralegal should analyze the core purpose of the consumer protection regulation and the specific risks the precedent case's product posed to consumers. They should then compare these to the risks and purpose of the new product, identifying commonalities in consumer vulnerability or potential harm to determine if the disclosure requirements are analogously applicable. Option C. The paralegal should attempt to find a direct match for the new product within the regulations, and if no exact match exists, conclude that the regulations do not apply, thereby avoiding the need for analogical reasoning. Option D. The paralegal should focus solely on the outcome of the precedent case, concluding that if the previous product faced similar disclosure requirements, the new product likely will too, without detailed analysis of the underlying reasoning or specific risks. The correct answer is B. The paralegal should analyze the core purpose of the consumer protection regulations and the specific risks the precedent case's product posed to consumers. They should then compare these to the risks and purpose of the new product, identifying commonalities in consumer vulnerability or potential harm to determine if the disclosure requirements are analogously applicable. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to apply existing regulatory guidance to a novel situation, necessitating careful analogical reasoning. The paralegal must identify the core principles of the existing regulations and then determine how those principles apply to a fact pattern that is not explicitly covered. This demands a nuanced understanding of the regulatory intent and the ability to draw persuasive comparisons between dissimilar, yet conceptually related, legal issues. The correct approach involves meticulously analyzing the factual similarities and differences between the precedent case and the current situation, focusing on the underlying regulatory objectives. By identifying the common purpose or harm that the regulation seeks to address, the paralegal can then analogize the new situation to the existing framework. This approach is ethically and regulatorily sound because it upholds the principle of consistent application of law and avoids arbitrary decision-making. It demonstrates a commitment to providing accurate and well-reasoned advice, grounded in the spirit and letter of the law, even when direct precedent is absent. This aligns with the professional duty to assist legal counsel in a manner that is both competent and ethical, ensuring that advice is based on a thorough and justifiable interpretation of applicable rules. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the precedent case entirely due to superficial factual differences. This fails to recognize that legal reasoning often involves abstracting principles from specific facts. The regulatory framework, particularly in areas like consumer protection or financial conduct, is designed to be adaptable. Ignoring a relevant case simply because the product or service is slightly different, without considering the underlying conduct or risk, can lead to non-compliance or inadequate client advice. This approach risks misinterpreting the scope and intent of the regulation, potentially exposing the client to regulatory scrutiny. Another incorrect approach would be to overstate the similarities between the precedent case and the current situation, forcing an analogy where it does not logically fit. This can occur when a paralegal is eager to find a direct match or is under pressure to provide a definitive answer. Such an approach can lead to providing inaccurate advice, as it misapplies the principles of the precedent case to a situation where they are not truly applicable. This can result in a client acting on flawed assumptions, leading to potential legal or financial repercussions. It also undermines the paralegal's credibility and the integrity of the legal advice provided. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the outcome of the precedent case without understanding the reasoning behind it. The specific facts of a case are important, but the legal principles derived from those facts are what allow for analogical reasoning, focusing only on whether the outcome was favorable or unfavorable, without dissecting the legal arguments and regulatory interpretations that led to that outcome, prevents a proper application of the precedent to new circumstances. This superficial analysis can lead to misjudgments about how the regulation would apply in a different context. The professional decision-making process for similar situations requires a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the facts of the current situation. Second, identify the relevant regulatory provisions. Third, research existing case law and regulatory guidance that interpret these provisions. Fourth, critically analyze any potentially analogous cases, focusing on the underlying legal principles and regulatory objectives, not just superficial factual similarities. Fifth, assess the strengths and weaknesses of the analogy. Finally, communicate the findings and any limitations of the analogy clearly to the supervising attorney, enabling them to make an informed decision. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a paralegal, tasked with researching federal and state administrative regulations concerning environmental compliance for a new client, has primarily relied on industry trade publications and summarized legal analyses found online, without directly consulting the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, or the relevant state administrative code. The paralegal has presented a brief summary to the supervising attorney, highlighting only the aspects that appear to support the client's current operational practices. What is the most ethically and professionally sound approach for the paralegal to take moving forward? Option A. Continue with the current research approach, assuming that the trade publications and online summaries accurately reflect the regulations, and focus on gathering more information that aligns with the client's existing practices. Option B. Focus solely on interpreting the information already gathered from secondary sources, arguing to the supervising attorney that these sources are generally reliable for initial assessments, and that a deep dive into primary regulations is an inefficient use of billable hours at this stage. Option C. Conduct a cursory review of the CFR and State Administrative Code to find any regulations that directly contradict the information in the trade publication, and then present both sets of information to the attorney without further analysis. Option D. Immediately cease all further research and inform the supervising attorney of the reliance on secondary sources and the selective presentation of information, requesting guidance on how to proceed with a comprehensive and accurate review of the primary regulations. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease all further research and inform the supervising attorney of the reliance on secondary sources and the selective presentation of information, requesting guidance on how to proceed with a comprehensive and accurate review of the primary regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a paralegal to navigate the complexities of administrative law research while adhering to strict ethical obligations regarding accuracy and client representation. The paralegal must not only locate relevant federal and state regulations, but also interpret them correctly to advise their supervising attorney. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting these regulations could lead to significant legal consequences for the client and professional repercussions for the paralegal and the firm. The core of the challenge lies in the paralegal's responsibility to provide accurate and reliable legal research, which forms the foundation for the attorney's legal strategy and advice. The correct approach involves diligently researching both federal and state administrative regulations that are directly applicable to the client's situation. This means identifying the relevant agencies, accessing official government sources for regulations, such as the Code of Federal Regulations for federal rules and state administrative codes for state rules, and thoroughly reading and understanding the language of those regulations. The paralegal must then synthesize this information, highlighting provisions that support or detract from the client's position, and present it to the supervising attorney with clear citations and an objective summary. This approach is ethically and professionally sound because it prioritizes accuracy, thoroughness, and candor. It aligns with the paralegal's duty to assist the attorney in providing competent representation, as mandated by professional conduct rules that emphasize diligence and the avoidance of misrepresentation. The paralegal's role is to provide the raw material and initial analysis, allowing the attorney to make the ultimate legal judgment. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on secondary sources or summaries without verifying the primary regulations. This is professionally unacceptable because secondary sources can be outdated, incomplete, or contain errors in interpretation. Relying on them without cross-referencing the actual regulations risks providing the attorney with inaccurate information, which could lead to flawed legal advice and potentially harm the client's case. This failure constitutes a breach of the duty of diligence and competence. Another incorrect approach would be to selectively present only the regulations that appear to favor the client's position, while omitting those that are unfavorable. This is ethically problematic as it constitutes a form of misrepresentation by omission. A paralegal has a duty to provide a complete and objective picture of the relevant law, even if some aspects are detrimental to the client. Failing to do so undermines the attorney's ability to provide comprehensive advice and can mislead the client. This violates the principles of honesty and integrity essential to legal practice. A third incorrect approach would be to interpret the regulations based on personal assumptions or beliefs, rather than on established legal principles and the plain language of the regulations themselves. Administrative law requires careful statutory construction and adherence to agency interpretations. Making subjective interpretations without a solid basis in legal precedent or regulatory text is speculative and unprofessional. This can lead to significant errors in understanding the scope and application of the law, thereby failing to meet the standard of competent legal research. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, clearly define the legal issue and the scope of research required. Second, identify the relevant jurisdictions, federal and state, and the specific agencies involved. Third, utilize reliable and authoritative sources for primary legal materials, such as official government websites and databases. Fourth, read and analyze the regulations thoroughly, paying close attention to definitions, operative clauses, and any accompanying interpretive rules or guidance. Fifth, synthesize findings objectively, presenting both supportive and adverse information. Finally, always consult with the supervising attorney for clarification on complex issues or when uncertainty arises regarding interpretation. Question 17. The control framework reveals that paralegal is tasked with explaining the implications of a complex contractual clause regarding force majeure to a client who has no legal training. Which of the following approaches best adheres to plain language principles for non-legal audiences while maintaining professional integrity? Option A. The paralegal uses a simplified analogy of a natural disaster preventing a scheduled event, explaining that if such an event occurs, the contract's obligations might be suspended or excused, and then offers to answer specific questions about how it might apply to the client's situation. Option B. The paralegal explains the clause using the exact legal terminology found in the contract, defining each term as it is introduced, and then provides a summary of the clause's effect. Option C. The paralegal provides a detailed breakdown of the legal precedents that have shaped the interpretation of force majeure clauses, citing case law and academic commentary to illustrate the scope and limitations of such provisions. Option D. The paralegal paraphrases the clause, replacing all legal terms with common synonyms, and then states that the clause essentially means the client might not have to perform their contractual duties under certain unforeseen circumstances. The correct answer is B. The paralegal explains the clause using the exact legal terminology found in the contract, defining each term as it is introduced, and then provides a summary of the clause's effect. Explanation. The control framework reveals that paralegal, acting as a conduit for complex legal information to a lay client, faces a significant professional challenge. The core difficulty lies in translating intricate legal jargon and procedural nuances into understandable terms without misrepresenting the legal position or providing unauthorized legal advice. This requires a delicate balance between accuracy and accessibility, demanding a high degree of judgment to ensure the client can make informed decisions. The correct approach involves meticulously simplifying complex legal concepts by using clear, everyday language, avoiding technical terms where possible, and providing concrete examples relevant to the client's situation. This aligns with the overarching duty of care owed to clients and the ethical imperative to ensure clients understand the advice and information provided. Specifically, under the regulatory framework governing paralegals, there is an implicit and often explicit expectation to facilitate client understanding, which directly supports the use of plain language principles. This approach upholds the client's right to be informed and empowers them to participate effectively in their legal matter. An incorrect approach that relies heavily on legalistic terminology, even if technically accurate, fails to meet the client's need for comprehension. This can lead to misunderstandings, potentially resulting in poor decisions by the client and subsequent complaints or claims against the paralegal or the firm. Such an approach breaches the duty to communicate effectively and can be seen as a failure to act in the client's best interests. Another incorrect approach that attempts to simplify by omitting crucial details or nuances of the legal concept is equally problematic. While aiming for simplicity, this can lead to an incomplete or misleading picture, which is a form of misrepresentation. The regulatory framework emphasizes accuracy and completeness in the information provided to clients. An oversimplification that sacrifices these elements is a serious ethical lapse. A further incorrect approach might involve using analogies that are not directly relevant or could be misinterpreted by the client. While analogies can be helpful, their effectiveness hinges on their accuracy and clarity in reflecting the legal principle. If an analogy is flawed, it can create more confusion than it resolves, undermining the paralegal's duty to provide clear and accurate information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the legal concept's complexity, the client's likely level of understanding, and the potential for misinterpretation. Paralegals should prioritize clarity and accuracy, testing their simplified explanations by asking themselves if a person with no legal background would grasp the core meaning and implications. When in doubt, it is always better to err on the side of providing slightly more detail in plain language rather than risking oversimplification that leads to misunderstanding. Consulting with a supervising attorney for review of complex explanations is also a critical step in ensuring client comprehension and adherence to professional standards. Question 18. Compliance review shows that a paralegal at your firm has been tasked with assessing the timeliness of a client's potential claim arising from a defective product purchased 2 years and 9 months ago. The client alleges the product caused personal injury. The paralegal has identified the relevant state's general civil statute of limitations as 3 years. The paralegal is preparing to advise the client that the claim is still timely. Which of the following approaches represents the most appropriate professional judgment in this situation? Option A. Apply the general 3-year statute of limitations and inform the client that they have approximately 3 months remaining to file their claim. Option B. Advise the client that the claim is likely timely, but recommend they consult directly with the supervising attorney to confirm, without providing specific statutory details. Option C. Research the specific statute of limitations for personal injury claims arising from defective products in the governing jurisdiction, considering any applicable tolling provisions or exceptions, and then present these findings to the supervising attorney for review and client communication. Option D. Advise the client that the claim is timely based on the general 3-year statute of limitations, as the purchase date is within this period. The correct answer is D. Advise the client that the claim is timely based on the general 3-year statute of limitations, as the purchase date is within this period. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the paralegal must accurately identify and apply the correct statute of limitations to a client's potential claim, which directly impacts the client's ability to seek legal recourse. Failure to do so can result in the irreversible loss of the client's rights, leading to significant professional liability and ethical breaches. The complexity arises from the need to understand the nuances of different causes of action and how they are treated under the relevant jurisdiction's statutory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the client's factual allegations to determine the most appropriate legal claim being asserted. Once the claim is identified, The paralegal must then consult the specific statutes of limitations applicable to that cause of action within the governing jurisdiction. This requires meticulous research into the relevant state statutes, case law interpreting those statutes, and any applicable procedural rules that might affect the commencement or tolling of the limitation period. The paralegal's duty of competence and diligence, as mandated by professional conduct rules, requires this level of precision. For instance, if the claim sounds in negligence, the paralegal must identify the statute of limitations for tort actions, which may differ from a breach of contract claim. Furthermore, the paralegal must consider any potential exceptions or tolling provisions that might extend the limitation period, such as minority, incapacity, or fraudulent concealment, as outlined in the jurisdiction statutes. An incorrect approach would be to assume a general statute of limitations applies without analyzing the specific nature of the client's claim. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and competence, potentially leading to the client's claim being time-barred. Another incorrect approach is to rely on outdated or secondary sources for the statute of limitations without verifying the current statutory provisions and relevant case law. This can result in misapplication of the law and prejudice to the client. A further incorrect approach is to provide a definitive legal opinion on the statute of limitations to the client without the direct supervision and authorization of an attorney. Paralegals are not licensed to practice law and should not offer legal advice, even if they have researched the relevant statutes. Professional decision-making in similar situations requires a systematic process. First, the paralegal must gather all relevant facts from the client. Second, they must identify potential legal claims based on those facts. Third, they must conduct thorough legal research to identify the specific statutes of limitations applicable to each potential claim within the governing jurisdiction, paying close attention to any tolling provisions or exceptions. Fourth, they must document their research and findings meticulously. Finally, they must present their findings to the supervising attorney for review and legal analysis, ensuring that the attorney makes the ultimate determination regarding the statute of limitations and advises the client accordingly. Question 19. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of missed opportunities to identify potentially biased jurors during voir dire in recent complex litigation cases handled by the firm. As a paralegal assigned to assist the lead attorney in jury selection, you observe a potential juror whose demeanor and responses to preliminary questions suggest a strong, unarticulated bias against your client's industry. The lead attorney is currently engaged in a discussion with opposing counsel regarding a procedural matter. What is the most appropriate course of action for the paralegal in this situation, strictly adhering to the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines applicable to paralegals in the context of jury selection? Option A. Advise opposing counsel that you believe a particular juror is biased and suggest they consider a challenge. Option B. Make a note of your observations and discreetly communicate them to the lead attorney as soon as they are available to discuss the matter. Option C. Discreetly approach the bench and inform the judge of your observations regarding the potential juror's bias. Option D. Immediately approach the potential juror and ask them clarifying questions to confirm your suspicions about their bias. The correct answer is C. Discreetly approach the bench and inform the judge of your observations regarding the potential juror's bias. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a paralegal to navigate the delicate balance between advocating for their client's interests during jury selection and adhering strictly to the ethical and procedural rules governing voir dire. The paralegal must understand the nuances of identifying potential juror bias, while also recognizing the limitations placed upon their participation and the need for judicial oversight. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any challenges or observations made are legally sound, ethically permissible, and strategically beneficial without overstepping professional boundaries. The correct approach involves the paralegal diligently observing potential jurors for any signs of bias or predisposition that could unfairly impact the client's case. This includes noting demeanor, responses to questions, and any potential connections to parties or witnesses. When such observations are made, the paralegal's role is to discreetly and professionally communicate these findings to the supervising attorney, who will then decide on the appropriate course of action, such as posing follow-up questions or lodging a challenge for cause or a peremptory challenge. This approach is correct because it aligns with the paralegal's supportive role in litigation, respecting the attorney's ultimate authority and the court's control over the proceedings. It adheres to ethical guidelines that prohibit paralegals from engaging in activities that constitute the practice of law, such as directly questioning jurors or making legal arguments to the court regarding jury selection. The paralegal's duty is to gather information and present it effectively to the attorney, enabling informed strategic decisions within the established legal framework. An incorrect approach would be for the paralegal to directly question potential jurors during voir dire. This is a failure because, in most jurisdictions governed by the Advanced Paralegal Certification (APC) exams assumed regulatory framework, typically U.S.-based state bar rules and ABA model rules of professional conduct, only licensed attorneys are permitted to question jurors. Paralegal engaging in direct questioning would be considered engaging in the unauthorized practice of law, a serious ethical violation. Another incorrect approach would be for the paralegal to independently decide to strike a juror based on their own assessment without consulting the attorney. This is a failure because jury selection strategy is a critical legal decision that rests with the attorney. The paralegal's role is advisory and supportive. Making such a decision unilaterally usurps the attorney's responsibility and could lead to strategic errors or ethical breaches if the strike is not legally justifiable or if it violates court rules regarding the number or type of challenges. A further incorrect approach would be for the paralegal to make unsolicited, argumentative comments to the judge about a juror's perceived bias. This is a failure because it bypasses the attorney, disrespects the court's authority, and constitutes the unauthorized practice of law. Paralegal should not be directly addressing the judge on substantive legal matters during trial proceedings, especially concerning jury selection. All communication with the court on such matters must be channeled through the supervising attorney. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the paralegal's scope of practice and ethical obligations. When observing potential issues during jury selection, the paralegal should first identify the specific behavior or response that raises concern. Next, they should document these observations objectively. The crucial step is to promptly and discreetly communicate these findings to the supervising attorney, providing a concise summary of the observation and its potential implications. The paralegal should then await the attorney's direction on how to proceed, whether it involves further observation, preparing to assist the attorney with a challenge, or taking no action. This process ensures that the paralegal acts as an effective support to the legal team, while remaining within ethical and regulatory boundaries. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal a draft email to opposing counsel regarding a discovery dispute. The email aims to request clarification on a specific document production issue. Which of the following approaches to drafting this email best adheres to the professional standards expected for an advanced paralegal certification APC candidate within the specified jurisdiction? Option A. Draft the email to include a brief, informal anecdote to build rapport with opposing counsel, and then state the discovery issue in general terms. Option B. Draft the email to include a summary of unrelated case law that the paralegal found interesting in addition to the discovery issue, and to mention a detail about the client's personal life that was shared in confidence. Option C. Draft the email to be concise and direct, clearly stating the specific document production issue and the requested clarification, while maintaining a professional and respectful tone. Option D. Draft the email to express frustration with the opposing counsel's previous responses, using strong, accusatory language, and omitting the specific details of the document in question to make them guess what is being asked. The correct answer is C. Draft the email to be concise and direct, clearly stating the specific document production issue and the requested clarification, while maintaining a professional and respectful tone. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in legal practice, balancing the need for clear, concise communication with the imperative to adhere to strict regulatory and ethical standards when drafting legal correspondence. The paralegal must ensure that the communication is not only effective in conveying the intended message, but also free from any misrepresentations, misleading statements, or breaches of client confidentiality, all within the framework of the Advanced Paralegal Certification (APC) exam's specified jurisdiction. The professional challenge lies in navigating these competing demands to produce a document that is both legally sound and ethically compliant. Correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the draft correspondence to ensure it accurately reflects the factual situation and legal position, uses precise language, avoids any potentially misleading or inflammatory statements, and strictly adheres to client confidentiality protocols. This approach is justified by the APC's emphasis on professional conduct and the regulatory framework governing legal practice, which mandates honesty, accuracy, and diligence in all communications. Specifically, it aligns with the ethical duties of competence, diligence, and communication owed to clients and the court, as well as the general principles of professional conduct that prohibit misrepresentation or the dissemination of false information. An incorrect approach that involves omitting crucial details to simplify the message risks creating a misleading impression, which violates the duty of candor and accuracy. This could lead to misinterpretations by the recipient and potentially prejudice the client's case. Another incorrect approach, such as using overly aggressive or informal language, can undermine the professionalism required in legal correspondence, potentially damaging the client's reputation and the firm's standing, and may even be construed as unprofessional conduct. Finally, including information that is not directly relevant to the matter at hand, or that breaches client confidentiality without explicit consent, is a serious ethical lapse. This not only violates the duty of confidentiality, but also dilutes the core message and could expose the firm to liability. Professionals should approach drafting legal correspondence by first understanding the purpose and audience of the communication. They must then gather all relevant facts and legal principles. The drafting process should involve iterative review, focusing on clarity, accuracy, conciseness, and adherence to all applicable rules of professional conduct and jurisdictional regulations. A final review for any potential misinterpretations or ethical breaches is essential before dissemination.